you for bringing me into what's become the idea revolution. So I'm a sculptor, a stone sculptor. And many of you may ask, how can that be relevant in the technological age? And I think that's just my challenge, to marry the traditional, the extremely traditional, with the contemporary. How do I do that? Very slowly, I guess. I think that it's probably best to start with 4 images real quickly because they're the source of inspiration for me. My favorite childhood home, which was an adobe because we lived within organic forms. My favorite childhood view because it's reflective of nature's scale, infinite sky, infinite ocean, and infinite rhythms. And my 2 questions that I revert to all the time when I come up against stumbling blocks is why, which obviously is the chance to wonder, to dream, to live a life of curiosity, and the why not, which is the push into action and to face the hurdles of fear that all artists have to face, to forgive ourselves the mistakes, and to sort of, I guess it's the belief that without an extreme number of failures, something truly original won't ever be developed. So let's get back to the first organic forms. This is not my sculpture. This is a seashell that is being eaten away by microbes, but it's a great reflection on how I think. It's usually thought of, creativity, or the act of creating, is usually thought of as an additive process, but I think reductively. So that means that reductive thought, action, will produce a positive form. That means the larger the negative space, the more interesting the positive shape. And I think that translates in a greater sense to the idea that deconstruction is not destroying, but might be finding something that's better. It's easy to see in my sort of extreme sculpting, how do I know where to stop? In these pieces, it's sort of the small shape, a very simple shape, a circle, spiral, very basic shapes of nature that are kind of replicated, will give to me the ultimate matrix that will hold against gravity. To find that, I start these collages. And in these collages, I'm taking seemingly disparate shapes, a zuni pot against the golden rule, and trying to find their commonalities. And in that, I'm trying to discover a sense of nature's framework that will hold over time against gravity. This is one of my favorites. It's where Albert Dürer has taken an Archimedes spiral, a 2-dimensional drawing, and pulled it out into a helix. And what could be a better building block than a DNA structure? I translate those to the right, you can see, is just the ultimate form of the sculpture that will hold. After studying the marble for so many years, of course, I have to go to where it's originated. And so we visited quarries throughout the world. This one is an image in Marble, Colorado. And if you can see on the very top left corner, that's the light up there is kind of the beginning of a cave. And ironically, when we got up there, it was, much to my surprise, I found men doing exactly the same thing as the microbes were doing to the seashell. They were hollowing out this mountain, and I think that's happening all across the world. So it gave me a whole new idea about my reclaimed material, and that maybe there was a story just in the cracks, bruises, or sort of rash of bubbles that gave another sort of interesting layer to my work, that of geologic time. So, did it go? So here we go back to a block. This was originally cut for a door frame in Dallas, and it was left as debris, so I grabbed it. With this, you can get a sense of the mass from which these pieces begin. You can see there's an awful lot of time that goes into this. They probably start at anywhere from 500 to 1,500 pounds, and in the end, they'll probably weigh about 50 to, or less actually. So after all that amazing human work, probably a little too much ego work, I had this kind of feeling, again, I guess going back to that image about nature's scale, like how important could that really be? So I had the desire to take these pieces out to the ocean, and I found this beautiful sort of cathedral-like setting under Huntington Pier, and I decided that I would make a video of this piece. I thought this would be the final product, and it was a little bit of the Western idea of permanence in stone married with a more Asian ideal of impermanence. And I thought this would be a gorgeous sort of finished product. As the waves came, they would sort of bring the stone back into the sea. Fortunately for me, the piece didn't break. That matrix was incredibly strong, which was another sort of learning aspect about the strength of lattice works. So I did it to all the rest of my sculptures. It kind of began a new theme. This piece, when it's up on a pedestal, looks exactly like a Rembrandt collar. In fact, that's what people started to call it, the Rembrandt collar. But in the sea, it's a sea anemone, a coral reef, an exotic shell. I love that idea that the context is a place where work is interpreted, just how influential or how much context influences. So as I was putting those pieces in the ocean, I was starting to think about the next body of work. It was sort of washing out of me. Well, I digress. One of the most important teaching student experiences I had as a kid was from some Native American Indians in New Mexico. And we were learning how to sand paint. And at the end, when you felt so committed to your artwork and you wanted to take it home to show your parents, you were attached, we had to take it out to the field. It was only a dirt field, and the dust devils came and swirled it all away. And it was so absolutely gorgeous that it left this imprint, probably forever. I think that was a big part of why, after so much labor, 2 to 4 years, I think, on the original piece, I had to release it to the ocean. There was something that seemed much more spiritual about the true process of making art. And I think that it was proven true by taking the other pieces as well. So as I did that, it was concluding that series, I went back to the drawing board of the collages and started to look at how the individual shapes work together. You can see the image of the ball of fish, how they move through space became something of the source, the idea source for the body of work I call the ribbons. This marble piece next to it is an enormous pinwheel, which actually spins. I wanted something playful, and anyway, that was the beginning of the ribbon series. But I think I'm probably most attached to the more simple lines, because it could be interpreted as not only a line, a wave, a ribbon, a vibration, and so the sketchbook images that go into the thought process. Perhaps with this image, you get to see the idea of perspective that this body of work represents. If you look at the flock of birds that is so gorgeous, as it undulates through space, you begin to ponder, how do they do that? What keeps them at the specific distance, and how do they decide the line that they're going to follow? I think that's what this body of work tries to discover. And as I got more and more into it, I started to look at places in nature that left those kinds of lines. This is a line that is left by the ocean on the sand. I paralleled that in this column piece. It it was a decision of mounting, whether they were mounting on the wall or growing up from the earth. All these pieces had to deal with gravity, just like the line on the beach. And the sense of gravity gave to me the idea of just how far I could push the curve of the stone. That leads to the next body of work, which is still a singular line, but trying to define three-dimensional space. In this sphere, it was sort of a sense of freedom because you could move it around. There was not an up or down, so it wasn't going to break on itself. I wanted to have this feeling of energy, of movement, and yet I think that these pieces are probably more about the emptiness of mass more than anything else. We're becoming more sophisticated in our rendering, and this goes back to a little bit of the marriage of the traditional and the contemporary. It's not so much that we're using this as a tool that we then go replicate in stone, but it's more of a conversation. And it gives me the sense of, does this line look like a boundary, or do you get a sense of the openness of matter, which I think that we're all experiencing on parts of the internet and how we interact, but as a physical being, do we still have the intuition, or are we building the intuition of that space, I guess? These are still, the cages are again with that concept, the emptiness of matter. And now I sort of end back in the studio developing the cages on a larger sense of scale. I guess I go back to the start of this talk. To me, marble is infinitely engaging because it holds the direct marks of humans. It's not historically or culturally specific, and as such, we all have access to that record. I think that is incredibly important because in it we recognize the humanity of others, and as proof of that, we hold these objects as treasures, and we keep them away in museums. Of course, being human beings, we then go and fight over them, but it is the fact that we recognize this commonality that is so significant, at least to me, and it's a place to start to find others. So that's it. Thank you so much for your time.